The sermon will be just a little bit differently today. I want to thank Allie. And she, when she speaks in the sermon, she'll be speaking of the scripture. So we're kind of combining it, a little Bible study lesson here. So, so the only way to actually know Jesus is to walk with him. To walk in the same way he walked, in his shoes, so to speak. But who is he? What's he like? We learn that Jesus is the one who invites us to participate with him. He's the one who wants to be incarnate in us and through us for others. And so we really can only know Jesus by becoming him. We really can only know Jesus by becoming him. Does that scare you? Does it make you curious? Does it awaken you? Is it baffling? Did I just say something real? Something true? In the text, the biblical text this morning, Jesus once again is involved in a confrontation with the gatekeepers of cultural power and prestige.
One Sabbath, while Jesus was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked some heads of grain, rubbed them in their hands, and ate them.
According to the Torah, we're to rest on the Sabbath. That is, we're not supposed to do any kind of work. It is the wisdom of justice and love. Sabbaths are a day off. They put limits on how much a master can work a slave. They put limits on how intrusive we can be into the bounty of the earth. They put limits on our own productivity and consumption. And at the same time, the cultural traditions of Torah encouraged everyone that the Sabbath would be a day to gather, to be in worship together, but also a day for family, for extended family, for feasting, for making love. As Jesus and his friends are relaxedly walking through the grain fields one Sabbath day, they basically just kind of grab a snack by eating some grain. I just can't imagine that tasted so good. But they were pulling some kind of grain off the stalks. And then?
But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?"
In other words, the Pharisees were accusing Jesus and his friends of violating Torah. They were accusing them of working, which, of course, is ludicrous. But it's also what fearful people do. They accuse another. They stretch a tiny little grain of truth into a much larger narrative of impurity and violation. We hear this every day of our life as politicians spin, as blue and red play political volleyball with each other. It's the same thing.
Jesus answered, "Have you not read what King David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath."
Jesus calls them on their literalist game, on their attempt to dominate and oppress, to put him in his place as less than and lower than and as unworthy. Jesus uses an example from Scripture as evidence that the legalities of law are given to us, in my words, as bumper rails. Laws and customs, the rules, serve the needs of life, the needs of flourishing, fertile life. They keep us in the game. That's their purpose. Laws and customs are not meant to solidify the needs of the gatekeepers, who almost always think of the rules as power to control. But then Jesus ups the ante and once again claims a sacred role for himself. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. In other words, hey, you Pharisees, I'm the actual meeting place, the temple, where heaven touches earth. The rules are there to help people participate in God's game of establishing heaven on earth. They've got nothing to do with segregation so that you can be the top dog and all the rest of us can be your lap dogs. And then the scene shifts. On yet another Sabbath, Jesus goes to church in the synagogue. And there, watching his every move, were the scribes and the Pharisees. Here's the text.
On another Sabbath, Jesus entered the synagogue and taught, and there was a man there whose right hand was withered.
What was it that Jesus was teaching? Remember what we've been saying the last several weeks? Luke, in chapter 4, lays out what Jesus taught right at the very start of his ministry. And it goes all through the Gospel of Luke. He was teaching that the Spirit of God's life, God's presence and power, had anointed him to proclaim good news to the poor, to give sight to the blind, release to the captives, liberation to the oppressed, and to announce jubilee, to announce that debt would be canceled, to announce that slaves would be released, to announce that the redistribution of wealth would begin so that everyone has enough to survive and thrive, so that generational poverty would be ended, and so would aristocratic wealth, because it was to be shared with the least of these. Jesus saw himself, he kept referring to himself as the Son of Man, which is a kind of end times prophet who announces that the end of corruption has come, it's arrived. And through him, through his own bodily presence, heaven had come alive, burst into their midst, and its invitation was for everyone who had hunger and thirst for these things. But notice that Luke, in the story, suddenly became very specific. The right hand was withered. In that culture, left-handedness was thought of with suspicion. The left hand was used for private matters. One basically never used the left hand publicly. For example, one didn't write with it, one didn't shake hands with it, one didn't point with it. Left-handedness was suspicious, a bit unclean. If this man's right hand was withered, or palsied, or paralyzed, or unusable, he was out of luck. Such a condition inevitably threw one into poverty and shame and reproach. The withered man was one of the least of these.
The scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether Jesus would cure on the Sabbath, so that they might find an accusation against him. Even though Jesus knew what they were thinking, he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come and stand here in the center."
In the center of the synagogue, where everyone can see. Jesus is again provoking. Knowing that the scribes and the Pharisees are creating a file on him, Jesus nevertheless provokes a confrontation.
Then Jesus said to the Sabbath gathering, I ask you, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to destroy it?
In other words, what is God's will? God's dream? Who is this God that we worship? What are God's characteristics? If we are God's people, what kind of images of God should we be with our lives? What kind of values are we supposed to embody so that heaven can touch earth? If we're the temple, that meeting place, then what's our message? What's our teaching? What does our life reflect? And then Jesus, after looking around at all of them, said to the man, stretch out your hand. And as he did so, something happened. The hand was restored. Jubilee had just erupted in the synagogue, but the Pharisees were filled with fury. And they discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. In the Gospel of Mark, it's more specific. They began the plot to destroy Jesus. The withered hand healing was a turning point in the Gospels. From this point on, Jesus is a marked man. Sweet Jesus had become increasingly sour to those who held the power of the purse, the power of the political order, the power of law and order, of religion and the sacred. Today, we celebrate our nation's declaration of independence from empire, specifically the empire of King George's Great Britain. I encourage you to get on the net and read the Declaration of Independence. It is a powerful document. The greatness of America, in my opinion, is the audacity to proclaim and embody the principle that we, the people, could be trusted enough to elect our own leaders who would legislate in such a way that, quoting from that declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that all are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among humanity, depriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That was so radical in its time. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. A radical document. Our American experiment boldly embodied itself as a system of checks and balances, limiting power and authority, distributing power throughout the institutions of society and within government itself so that it could never accrue into one center. That's why we have a legislative and executive and judicial branch of government. We installed civilian control over the military, free speech for media, diversity of religion without sanction. We formed a union seeking a more perfect union. Like biblical Israel, we were conceived with incredible aspirations. Our Declaration of Independence and Constitution, along with other founding documents, became for us an American scripture, became for us a covenant, became for us a Torah, if you will, that bound us together as a people of sacred purpose. But just like biblical Israel, we quickly fell into the addicting sin of racism, genocide of the indigenous, enslavement of Africans, brutal cruelty toward Asian races, an unforgiving economic system that did create generational poverty and did create aristocratic wealth. We called ourselves a land of opportunity, and then we tilted the tables, so to speak, for people that look like me, white, male, educated. America is beautiful. It's gorgeous. But it certainly has to mask an awful lot of blemishes. Now, as Christians, we cannot claim to love unless we specifically, relationally embody that love towards a specific other. You don't love in the abstract. When we profess our love for our country, this country, we're professing responsibility for those blemishes. We take its sin on our shoulders. We wear its shame and guilt. Yet we also, when we say we love our country, continually lift up those aspirational ideals that are found within the American scripture, lifting them up through the example of how we ourselves live those ideals imperfectly through our own attitudes, actions, and assets. Love is never cheap. It's always costly. It's never just talk. It is also and intimately embodied. Now, how this relates to grain in the fields, to withered hands, and later to our Eucharist. Jesus was not an abstract dreamer. There was specific content in his teachings and embodied in his life. It eventually cost him his life. He was a marked man. We're called to follow that example. We're called to be ourselves a temple, a meeting place where heaven touches earth. It's not an ideal pie in the sky heaven on earth, but specific and very concrete. Is your life, how you're living it today, is it good news to actual poor people? Can you name them? Do you know them? Have you touched them? Does your life offer sight to the blind, freedom to the imprisoned, liberation for those crushed by oppression? Politically, I'm talking politically, but also psychologically, spiritually, culturally, talking about in your family, in your neighborhood, within your church. Does your life embody an alternative, a public alternative to Christian scribes and Pharisees, to politicians who desire to restrict we the people into one tribe of think-alikes? Does your life reflect Jubilee? Do you share your assets? Are you willing to secure not only your own life, but the life of others? Does your life reflect an openness to care with compassion and mercy for your enemy? Are you willing to know your enemy, to touch your enemy, to offer healing and hope? Are you willing to seek higher ground in order to find common ground? There's a cost to following Jesus. Jesus did not provoke conflict because he was rebellious. He was not a permanent adolescent. He provoked conflict to inspire and encourage a dull-hearted people who were in such spiritual despair that they could no longer even imagine an alternative. They could no longer imagine that there was in truth and in reality a higher ground, a different way, a third way. Jesus was not a Pharisee. He wasn't a scribe, he wasn't a Sadducee or a Zealot or a Herodian or an Essene. In our context, Jesus is not a Democrat or a Republican or a socialist or a libertarian or a green. If anything, Jesus was an anarchist, submitting to no other power than the power of a presence that proclaimed good news to the poor, sight to the blind, liberation for the oppressed, and jubilee, release, forgiveness, restoration, reconciliation, new creation, so that God could be all and all. We Christians, I think, would do well to be such holy anarchists, offering an alternative to a nation with a withered soul. We could restore the ideals of our American covenant. We could embody in ourselves restitution and reparation, amends and penance for past sins, so that tomorrow could be a feast and a celebration rather than the tragedy of missed opportunity. Langston Hughes was a poet in the early 20th century, an African-American poet, and I think this poem that Ellie and I are about to read provides us with a renewed call to purpose and mission. And I want to encourage us to hear and heed these words in joyful anticipation that our Christian faith, our Jesus-like embodiment, might play a positive role in helping America be America for all. The poem is called Let America Be America Again. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream that it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free.
America never was America to me.
Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be that great, strong land of love where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme, that any man be crushed by one above.
It never was America to me.
Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe.
There's never been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland of the free.
Say, who are you that mumbles in the dark? And who are you that draws a veil across the stars?
I am the poor white, fooled and pushed apart. I am the black bearing slavery scars. I am the red man driven from the land. I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak. I am the young man full of strength and hope, tangled in that ancient endless chain of profit, power, gain, of grab the land, of grab the gold, of grab the ways of satisfying need, of work the men, of take the pay, of owning everything for one's own greed. I am the farmer, bondsman to the soil. I am the worker sold to the machine. I am the black, servant to you all. I am the people, humble, hungry, mean. Hungry yet today despite the dream, beaten yet today. Oh, pioneers. I am the man who never got ahead, the poorest worker bartered through the years. Yet I'm the one who dreamt our basic dream. In the old world, while still a serf of kings, who dreamt a dream so strong, so brave, so true, that even yet its mighty daring sings in every brick and stone, in every furrow turned. That's made America the land it is, the land it has become. Oh, I'm the man who sailed those early seas in search of what I meant to be my home, for I'm the one who left dark Ireland's shore and Poland's plain and England's grassy lay, and torn from black Africa's strand I came to build a homeland of the free. The free? Who said the free? Not me. Surely not me. The millions on relief today, the millions shot down when we strike, the millions who have nothing for our pay, for all the dreams we've dreamed and all the songs we've sung and all the hopes we've held and all the flags we've hung, the millions who have nothing for our pay except the dream that's almost dead today. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be, the land where every man is free, the land that's mine, the poor man's, the Indian, blacks, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must bring back our mighty dream again. Sure, call me any ugly name you choose. The steel of freedom does not stain. For those who live like leeches on the people's lives, we must take our land again. America. Yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me. And yet I swear this oath, America will be.
Out of the wrack and ruin of our gangsters' death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we the people must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains and the endless plain, all the stretch of these great green states, and make America again.